No ceasefire, no evacuation, little hope, and the dark threat of finishing the job in Aleppo.
الله موجودة بس رحموني عائلتي الصراحة تحت التراب فقعد ريحتها.
Good evening. The wounded, having been taken to buses on the edge of the city, are now back in the rebel-held corner of Aleppo, strewn about corridors of the wrecked hospitals. The huddled masses who herded out of the ruins in the expectation of Russian-guaranteed freedom last night are now in hiding again tonight. The international community appears paralysed, unknowing and unwilling as Aleppo's agony reignites. Tonight, we try to establish what's gone wrong, but have to report future hope in short supply.
Also tonight, the prison-like working conditions behind one of Britain's most high-end, high-profile sports goods companies. Not Sports Direct, but JD Sports. An exclusive undercover report. One MP says they treat their workers like scum.
If you get tired, I would like to sit on a box and carry on.
No sitting down, no.
Yeah.
You get fired.
Fired?
Especially people sitting down.
You sack people for sitting down?
Yeah.
Council tax will rise in the next 2 years to fund the hole in social care, but the hole is £2.5 billion deep, and the rise could just cause more pain, especially for poorer families. From one funding hole to another, the one in education risks becoming a sinkhole for schools in big cities like Birmingham and Manchester after the government reviews how and where money is spent.
Also tonight, it was a Wednesday, 32 weeks ago, that 17-year-old Felix Alexander took his own life. His suicide, in part, was to blame on internet bullying by his schoolmates and by children who didn't even know him. Thousands are now sharing accounts of cyberbullying and by kids at school. Tonight, his mother talks to us about what we need to know.
Kids need to understand that actions have consequences. You can't just say something, switch off your computer and it goes away, because somebody received that and you have no idea what's going on in their heart and in their head.
So, with the breakdown of the ceasefire, thousands of civilians are still trapped in the nightmare that is rebel-held Aleppo, an ever-shrinking enclave where the shelling has barely paused, where witnesses say bodies still lie in the streets. Crowds of civilians were waiting for buses out of the city when fighting resumed this morning. Tonight, Russia and Turkey have agreed once again to start the evacuation as soon as possible. But I must warn you, there are some distressing scenes in Jonathan Rugman's report.
Yesterday's ceasefire, brokered by the Turks, broke down this morning. Eyewitnesses described airstrikes and dozens of artillery shells, trapping civilians as well as stopping rebel fighters from leaving.
عشرات القذائف كما قلنا قوات النظام تقوم باستهداف الأحياء الأربعة أحياء أو الخمسة أحياء التي لا تزال.
As you see, a lot of people are waiting in front of the hospital.
Last night, our camera woman, Wad Al-Khatib, filmed from a hospital roof injured civilians waiting to be evacuated. In fact, nobody here escaped. After a 4 to 5 hour wait at a checkpoint, they were sent back here this morning when the ceasefire ended. These the survivors of what the UN describes as extremely heavy government bombardment in areas packed with ordinary people.
يا عالم يا ناس رحمة الله موجودة بس رحموني عائلتي الصراحة تحت التراب فقعد ريحتها ما حدا دم.
شو صار معكم اليوم؟
نزلت غالي البناية كلياتها على أبو فوقنا ماتوا 6 من عائلتي والباقي كلها مسقطنا. طيب عنا الأولاد ما لنا غير الله يطلع عليهم، لا عنا بيت لا عنا بطرات لا عنا شيء.
اليوم قابلنا امبارح لهنا نطلع من هون شو امي؟ ما بعرف امر الدولة مشان ايش ما بعرف. هلا شوفت علينا عم بضربوا كل الصواب المستشفى كلها.
Around 20 government buses sent to evacuate sit tantalisingly close. Their lights flashing, their engines running, plastered with pictures of a president whose forces, the UN says, probably committed war crimes today. Those crimes, ironically, against his own missing passengers. Mr. Assad himself has told Russian television the West's calls for a ceasefire here are nothing more than an attempt to save terrorists.
The translation of their statement is for Russia, please stop the advancement of the Syrian army against the terrorists. That's the meaning of that statement. Forget about the rest. You went too far in defeating the terrorists. That shouldn't happen.
Last night, these Islamic Front fighters were still holding out in the east of the city, singing, "We will stay here despite the pain." Sunni militants have themselves prevented civilians from leaving. And it was last week's jihadist offensive on two Shia villages, Fua and Kafraya, which is being blamed by Syrian government forces for the ceasefire breaking down. Syria's backer, Iran, said it wanted to evacuate the injured from here simultaneously. But this rural battleground is now central to Syria's revolution, and the rebels refused. In Aleppo, that revolution is surely in its final hours. Rebel shelling has killed at least 6 people today, but the Russians are predicting this battle will be over in the next 2 to 3 days, while Iran's president has already sent his message of congratulations to Mr. Assad.
Jonathan Rugman. Earlier I spoke to Zuhair El-Shamali, a citizen journalist in the last rebel-held enclave in Aleppo. I started by asking what had happened there since we spoke on this programme last night.
From yesterday night until now, the plans was about to let the injured people to get out from the city towards the countryside and then to Turkey to get treatment at 5 a.m. But there was some delay. The cars of that were carrying the patients and the injured people were forced by the Iranian militias that were at the checkpoints in the regime area, who have harassed them and asked them and forced them to go back to the east. The artillery bombs have just started to hit the city from the morning, and it went like kind of in escalations levels, hour after an hour. Bombs have started to hit the city very crucially and making a hell of destructions and injuries between the people who are overcrowding in the east of Aleppo.
Zuhair, what is the situation now? No new talks, presumably, no new option for some kind of ceasefire, right?
Not at all. We haven't got any information about any new set of agreements.
How many people are now back with you? The same number, 60,000?
No one have left ever, so the amount of people is still like around 6 people. We don't know how many people were injured today, how many people were killed, or how many people are trapped under the rubble.
Any hope at all? Any hope for a ceasefire?
Yes, of course. As long as we are alive here, as long as there is people living here, staying, and they are holding on, and they haven't died yet, including me. So we will just keep hope for a cessation. I just think as long as I'm alive, there is some hope, and we can end from this war.
Zuhair, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, a few moments ago, France turned off the lights on the Eiffel Tower in a symbol of solidarity with the Syrians in Aleppo, a symbol too, perhaps, of the West's sheer impotence in the face of what is happening. Before we came on air, I spoke to Britta Hagi Hassan. He's the mayor of East Aleppo, who is currently in Paris and has asked to address the EU Council tomorrow. He told us of his fears for the coming hours.
Tonight, 50,000 people are expecting death to come at any moment. They are waiting to be butchered if the regime advances or storms the area. Whoever survives the bombing will be butchered because of the advance of the Iranian and Iraqi militias, which are committing atrocities in the areas they are capturing. Everyone is in a state of extreme fear and panic about what's happening. They are expecting to be butchered and women to be raped because the same regime who killed 500,000 people during the revolution will not be afraid to do that now. especially given the silence of the international community. We call urgently for a ceasefire to evacuate the civilians out of Aleppo. Every hour that passes is worse than the previous one. They are not expecting to live to see tomorrow.
Now, it is the biggest sports retailer in the UK with soaring profits to match. But an undercover report by this programme reveals the shocking truth behind the success of JD Sports. At their central warehouse in Rochdale, we found JD staff boasting of sacking people at will just for sitting down. And a 3 strikes and you're out policy, penalising everything from wearing the wrong kind of underwear to chewing gum. JD Sports denies such practices, but see for yourself with this special report from our North of England correspondent, Kieran Jenkins.
It's one of the biggest names on the high street, making record profits, doing brisk business in the run-up to Christmas. JD Sports sells high-end sportswear brands at premium prices. Last year's turnover, £1.8 billion. Tonight, we reveal the reality behind JD Sports' stunning success.
No, it's more work. Prisoners get more for bringing respect.
An army of hundreds of minimum wage workers pushed to their limit. Continually fearing the sack.
Sitting down. You sack people for sitting down?
Yeah. Working like machines.
The fight's been kicked out of them. They don't think anybody's on their side. I think they're treated like scum.
One of Theresa May's first promises as Prime Minister was to improve conditions for working people. She might do well to start right here. On a business park in Rochdale, this is the vast warehouse at the heart of JD Sports' operation. If you've shopped at JD Sports this Christmas, chances are it passed through here. We've spent 5 weeks undercover.
Access denied.
Our reporter has a job through Assist Recruitment, an employment agency. There are 1,500 people working here, hundreds of agency workers, alongside staff employed directly by JD Sports. The company calls this place a first-rate facility. Workers have called it a prison. They must scan their fingerprints when they arrive, and again when they leave. And each side of closely monitored break times. Our reporter is on 12-hour shifts, 6 to 6. Every worker has a target, everyone's performance is on display. Assist agency workers answer to JD Sports supervisors. Bosses who bark at them to work harder.
I want to see your arm moving! Can't be
The work is relentless. So is the music on loop over the tannoy. And you dare not step out of line. JD Sports staff enforce strict discipline by issuing strikes. 3 strikes and you could be fired.
What do you have to do to get the 3 strikes?
Anything, you can do anything. You can be late, you can take an unauthorised absence.
JD Sports tell us they do not operate a strike system. What then is happening here?
What's a strike? Because some people think you get a strike.
You get strikes, you get 3 strikes, you get sacked.
What are the 3 strikes?
Chewing gum, matches, lighters, mobile phones.
It seems you can lose your job over almost anything.
Hoodies, incorrect uniform, anything with a logo on the front of it, anything with a designer label on it, even your watch. So like I'm looking at your watch while I'm talking to you. If that was a designer watch, I'd give you a warning.
Right. The watches.
You've got earphones, that's another warning. There's loads of things you're not allowed to wear or do.
Wrong attitude, strike. Chocolate, anything that could cause damage may be a strike. Phones, lighters, hoodies, headphones breach health and safety and could be a strike. All you're allowed are a few essentials in a clear plastic bag. And no branded clothing because you might have stolen it. Trust has broken down. Everyone's a suspected thief, searched repeatedly.
Pocket check, please, young lady.
Got any pockets there?
No.
No?
JD Sports says only 1 in 10 staff are randomly searched. On shift, in the warehouse, security say this.
Everybody gets stuff, everybody. We have to do everybody in a day.
JD Sports say their security measures are normal common sense precautions and their disciplinary policy is normal too. They say it's a staged process from informal conversations to written warnings and can be appealed. The regime here seems to make JD supervisors and team leaders all powerful. So powerful, some boast of sacking workers at will. Our reporter is on her feet 11 hours a day. She asks to sit down. This is what she's told.
What if you get tired and we like to sit on a box and carry on? Or...
No sitting down, no.
Yeah.
You get fired.
Fired?
I sack people for sitting down.
You sack people for sitting down?
Yeah. Because why should you sit down there doing your job when she's sweating on that station doing her job? In comparison to what they're doing, you've got a really easy job. Right, so you shouldn't have to sit down.
In cases of serious misconduct, JD Sports says there's a thorough investigation and workers are never sacked on the spot. JD Sports insist they're not like other retailers under scrutiny recently. Who could they have in mind? Sports Direct, JD's main rival, has been engulfed by a scandal over working conditions.
Really? Yeah. No, this doesn't happen like this.
Sports Direct operating profits have plunged 57%, while JD profits are up 63%. Consider that JD Sports should have been well aware of the Sports Direct scandal, that their brand has soared recently as Sports Direct has faltered. And then consider that conditions here, right at the heart of JD Sports, may have been a lot like Sports Direct all along.
I'm disgusted. I think it's draconian.
We showed our footage to this man, the MP who led the Parliamentary inquiry into Sports Direct. You were outraged by the 6-strike policy at Sports Direct. This is 3 strikes at JD Sports.
Well, this is twice as bad. It's twice as bad as what we found at Sports Direct. It's as simple as that.
Should workers just be fired just like that?
Well, it's a matter of coercion and control. It's a matter of power, this. It's a case of know your place, because I can get rid of you like that. At 5:30 p.m. in Rochdale, they file in to work through the night. Who knows how many agency workers, like our reporter, weren't even given a contract. She asked for one. It said she could be let go anytime. 0 hours, 0 job security. You can turn up for work, they can turn you away.
Some people send
assistant simple. There's no work. So if you know we're here, they only send you home.
Really?
People come from, like yourself, Manchester, they come in and they say there's no work, go back home.
That's JD as well as...
Well, JD don't get sent home.
The prospect of regular work is dangled before them. The chance of a permanent job with JD Sports, starting at 10p above minimum wage. But they know they're being watched.
Everywhere, yeah.
JD Sports tell us workers aren't punished if they miss targets, called Key Performance Indicators, KPIs. Our reporter is told it could earn her a strike and cost her a permanent job.
Usually a strike. Basically, if you can't hit the KPI, then you're not good for the company because you're not producing what the company requires of you. Essentially, that's the issue.
Our reporter is on relabelling duties. It's robotic work. Every hour, the same target. If they log more work 1 hour and less the next, but still meet the target, for this supervisor, that's unacceptable.
Find anybody doing that, look for warning. Okay? Some do in the past, I found people doing it, and that's what happened to them. Because it is actually fraud.
These workers, low paid, exhausted, didn't miss the target. They just spread out the work. For that, they really are being accused of fraud.
Say that is fraud, and you will get disciplinary action.
The culture here appears to be the relentless pursuit of profit. But workers aren't just being pushed to their limit. We've uncovered evidence suggesting some are effectively being paid less than the minimum wage. Just look at these queues to leave the building. After working 12 hours,
So bad.
you wait and wait.
Take your visits off, please. Take your visits off as well, please.
Airport-style security,
Some people, they don't like coming back.
airport-style delays.
What do you want? Just the normal.
Just do that, please.
JD Sports told us it's made changes, that queuing time is paid. This footage is from the last fortnight. It would take up to 15 minutes to get out. An agency manager says categorically, queuing time unpaid.
We don't get paid for queuing time, do we? Okay then.
Out in the cold, you queue to get in, unpaid.
But we're going to get late now. We can't get late.
JD Sports says there aren't long queues.
Make us late. Make us cold.
The agency advises our worker to arrive earlier. And if the queue makes you late,
even if it is 1 minute, like you can see here.
Yeah.
JD Sports, who dish out the permanent jobs, may hold it against you.
All this here, lateness, it goes against you.
So they give up their time for nothing, earning less effectively than the minimum wage.
I find that so depressing.
Are these workers exploited?
I think they're treated like scum. I think what you see is that, you're not allowed to sit down. I can produce a strike as a supervisor to you as a worker on any whim that I want. I can get rid of you at a moment's notice. And actually, I don't pay for you to come in early during a shift, and I certainly don't pay for you to when you have to go late at the end of a shift. I'm just treating you like cattle. You're a commodity that helps me make more money, and I think that's disgraceful.
JD Sports and Assist Recruitment say they believe a large number of our allegations are untrue. They say if they prove to be accurate, they're willing to investigate. Their employees' welfare, they say, is their utmost priority. But in Rochdale, just listen to where this woman would rather work. Mass employment, 21st century style. A politician would say they're just about managing. A worker might tell you they've had just about enough.
And that special report by Kieran Jenkins. Now, if you work at JD Sports and would like to tell us your experiences, you can get in touch by emailing us at c4investigations@itn.co.uk. Now, with me now is the Labour MP Ian Wright, the chair of the Business Select Committee, who you just saw in that film, and the Conservative MP Chris Philp, who is a member of the Treasury Select Committee. Welcome to you both. Chris Philp, let me start with you. These are Ian Wright's words, treated like scum. You saw the film, what's your reaction?
Well, I agree with Ian. What we saw on that film there, workers being treated appallingly, is disgraceful, and that should not happen in a civilised 21st century country. It's absolutely appalling. It's happening today.
So what will you do about it?
Well, I think we need to tighten up the law, to be honest, in areas around zero-hour contracts. It's been tightened up a bit already. So, for example, it used to be the case until last year that workers could be forced to do no work other than for the zero-hour employer, even when that zero-hour employer had no work to give them. That's been scrapped, and that's good. But things like counting waiting time for security or not counting waiting time for security towards your working hours is clearly wrong. That should be outlawed straight away.
You agree, presumably. But would you also call for an investigation into JD Sports, as you did with Sports Direct?
Absolutely, and we're looking into this in the Select Committee in terms of future world of work. What does work look like in Britain in the 21st century? This looks depressingly familiar. It looks like what happened with Sports Direct. And if you're working in a warehouse in Britain in 2016, you're going to be treated like scum.
But specifically, you want to see JD Sports hauled in front of the Commons as well?
Yes, but there's a long list there as well, to be honest.
Would you agree with that? Would you like to see them in the Commons?
I think JD Sports should be in front of Ian's committee at the first opportunity to answer to Parliament, to Ian and his colleagues, for what we saw on that film. That should happen as a matter of urgency. And I'm sure, and the government, by the way, is reviewing this area, and I think it would be helpful if Ian's committee made some suggestions to government in this area.
OK, Ian, I mean, you described it very dramatically, treated like scum, but they weren't forced to take those jobs. I mean, they volunteered to work in these places, and a lot of them, despite the appalling conditions, want to carry on and work full-time for JD Sports.
I don't agree with that, actually. The idea that, you should be lucky that you've got a job, you can walk away at any moment in time. Some people on low or no skills don't have that opportunity. It's a case of they're trying to get any single type of employment that they can. And if you're, on precarious work, you don't have any security when it comes to the next week's wages. That's what the reality of Britain is in 2016 for a large number of people.
But the new reality of today's online shopping economy, digital economy, is that a lot of people actually quite like zero-hours contracts. They like the flexibility, not necessarily these conditions, but they do like the flexibility that comes with those contracts. And that is the way the economy now works, whether it's Uber or Amazon, JD Sports, Sports Direct, we're increasingly in that kind of reality.
That gig economy, that on-demand economy, does provide to some workers that flexibility, but not if you're at the lower end of it. And when you see, warehouse staff, when you see sometimes in terms of drivers, they're seen as self-employed or on zero-hours contracts, they don't have flexibility. They're suffering from exploitation and abuse.
I think we should also, and what we saw in that video was terrible and we should stop it from happening, but we should also just be aware of the wider context. Only 3% of the UK workforce are on zero-hour contracts. They work on average...
But growing by 20% in the last year. I mean, that number's going up.
It has gone up, but it's 3% of the total. And I think what is important is the minimum wage increase. We've seen a 15% increase in the minimum wage in the time I've been in Parliament. It's going to go up even further. And that is critical. That massive minimum wage increase is critical to helping people who are struggling. But what we saw on that film is unacceptable in any circumstances.
The TU says that on the average worker who's on a normal contract gets £11.05 an hour. The average worker on a zero-hours contract gets £4 less than that. That's a huge difference.
The minimum wage. That's right. Well, the minimum wage obviously is a minimum. Yeah. But that minimum of £7, that was... It was
but you're not going to be paid much more if you're on a zero-hours
Well, it was £6.50 when I was elected. It's now £7.20. It's going up to £9 an hour by 2020, higher even than Ed Miliband suggested at the last election. And the ONS published figures last month showing that for the poorest people in society, in the last year, their income's gone up by 6%. And I'm proud it's a Conservative government that has legislated that minimum wage increase. But there is clearly some change required to regulate what we saw in that film, and I hope that's going to come.
You've got minimum wage, you've got the law on people's side, but many firms, we saw it at Sports Direct, there are hints of this in JD Sports, where they're not being paid the minimum wage because of things like security checks and stuff. They're not being enforced. And so surely, Chris, a big part of this is making sure that enforcement agencies have the resources and the powers to be able to step in and intervene.
I agree, and the enforcement budget has doubled year on year, but I suspect it may need to go further.
We're running out of time, but I've one other subject. We are facing a wave of strikes now. We've got Southern Rail, the talks are broken down with the employers. We've got the Royal Mail on strike, possibly a BA strike. I mean, this is a winter of discontent coming up, isn't it?
Well, I'm afraid to say that Jeremy Corbyn's hard-left union allies in ASLEF and the RMT are causing mayhem. I've met both of them, and I know what's happening on Southern Railway because it affects Croydon, which is the area
But
I
this
represent.
is about three big companies, Royal Mail, BA and Southern Rail.
Let me tell you about the RMT. The dispute is over who presses the button that opens and closes the door. There are no job losses, there are no pay cuts, there is no safety issue. Yet 300,000 people every day, including today, are being inconvenienced. The RMT and ASLEF have gone way too far, and they should call it off straight away.
Short response from you.
I don't want anybody to be holding the economy and workers to ransom, but I think in terms of a good, dignified, decent economy, unions play a role in that. Unite exposed the failings at Sports Direct. JD Sports is not unionised. I do think we need to have trade unions as a positive force in British economy.
OK, got to leave it there. Run out of time. Ian Wright, Chris Hope, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
John.
Council tax bills could go up by 6% over the next 2 years in an effort to tackle the crisis in social care. For someone in the average Band D property, that means a £90 increase. But with the funding shortfall more than £2.5 billion, council leaders say it won't be nearly enough. Our health and social care correspondent Victoria MacDonald is in Westminster. Victoria.
Yes, it would appear, John, that Theresa May has overcome her concerns about raising council tax and has tomorrow we will hear in the local government settlement that councils can go ahead and raise 6% extra over 3 years. Now, that can be front-loaded, so it could be 3%, and then nothing in the final year, or they could keep it at 2% for each of those 3 years. What is clear is that the government is listening to the massive concerns that this was not mentioned in the autumn statement, despite expectations. And certainly today, it dominated PMQs.
This social care crisis forces people to give up work to care for loved ones because there isn't a system to do it, makes people stay in hospital longer than they should, and leads people into a horrible, isolated life when they should be cared for by all of us through a properly funded social care system. Get a grip and fund it properly, please.
It is this government that will provide a long-term, sustainable system for social care that gives reassurance to people. But when he talks about governments ducking social care, let's look about 13 years of Labour in government.
Yes, well, you heard the Prime Minister there talking about long-term and sustainable settlement. What that is, nobody quite knows. Now, charities welcomed tomorrow's announcement that was leaked today, but they say it won't go near enough to meeting that funding gap between need and what is currently missing, £2.5 billion by the end of this Parliament. They also say the wealthier areas will raise more in the places they need it the less. And there's also the point that next year there are local authority elections. So it is not even clear yet that councils will take this opportunity to raise council tax by 3% and tell their constituents that they're going to have to pay extra.
Victoria, thanks very much. Now, some of England's biggest cities, including London, Birmingham and Manchester, are set to lose out as the government announces plans for one of the biggest changes to school funding in decades. The Education Secretary, Justin Greening, set out proposals to shake up the national funding formula, claiming that current levels across the country were inconsistent and unfair. Unions say it does nothing to alter a chronic shortfall in budgets. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis reports from Gloucestershire.
Opened last year, the primary section of King's Oak Academy in Gloucestershire. In what many consider a vastly outdated postcode lottery of school funding, they're still working out here if they win or lose under the government's plans to completely rewrite the way English schools are funded.
What's been created over time is a funding system that allows similar schools with similar students to receive levels of funding so different that they put some young people at an educational disadvantage.
Currently, a school in Barnsley could receive 50% more funding if it were located in the London borough of Hackney. So the government wants a new formula, based less on past local authority allocations, where from 2018 most schools' budgets would be set nationally. The new formula, says the government, would lead to around 10,000 schools in England seeing an increase to their annual budgets, some by more than 5%. A similar number, however, would see a reduction in theirs. But the government insists by no more than 1.5% per pupil per year. Many schools in London and other big cities, for instance, would see their budgets cut.
We have reception over on the left-hand side.
A fairer, more transparent system is welcome, says the principal here in South Gloucestershire. But it's not the formula which bothers him so much as the health of the fund itself.
National funding formula is good for South Gloss. It's good for schools nationally, I believe. provided it is a national funding formula which is fair, which means that we've got, in order to make it fair, more money needs to go into the system.
The issue of not how the money is distributed, but rather how much there is in the first place, was raised today in a report by the National Audit Office. Their point that although the education budget has been protected, after you take into account rising costs, rising pupil numbers, the actual total amount of savings schools across England will have to make by 2020 equals £3 billion. The government, they say, has simply failed to communicate to schools the scale and pace of the savings needed. Today, 5 teachers' unions issued a joint statement claiming schools faced the biggest real terms cuts in a generation.
Everybody is facing cuts. Even the schools that were worst off before this are going to be even worse off at the end of it. The government has to put more money in, or class sizes across the country are going up, subjects are going to be lost, individual attention for our young people is going to go down.
The Department for Education has said that with appropriate support, schools should be able to make the £3 billion savings needed through more efficient ways of operating.
Talks to resolve that dispute between Southern Railway and its staff have been adjourned until tomorrow. The company warned passengers that the knock-on effect of the 2-day stoppage ending at midnight tonight means that services could still be, quote, severely disrupted tomorrow. And British Airways passengers could also face disruption following an overwhelming vote by cabin crew to strike over pay. Union leaders say low pay levels have become a safety issue because some staff can't afford not to work when they're sick or tired from doing second jobs.
Former football coach Barry Bennell has been remanded in custody after appearing in court charged with child sex offences. The 62-year-old, who appeared via video link, sat with his arms crossed as 8 charges, including 5 counts of indecent assault, were read to South Cheshire Magistrates Court. All of the alleged offences relate to the same victim. He claims that he rode around on a motorbike looking for a confrontation so I could kill. Not the confessions of a convicted serial killer, but the proud boast of the president of the Philippines. No stranger to controversy, President Rodrigo Duterte, nicknamed Dirty Harry, told business leaders he personally killed criminal suspects when he was mayor of the southern city of Davao. It's not the first time that he's made that kind of claim, though, as our Asia correspondent Jonathan Miller now reports.
Midnight Manila, and in the black alleys, the Philippines' doomed youth pass by in body bags. The bloodiest of battles in President Duterte's war on drugs waged here. 6,000 dead in fewer than 6 months. Duterte's death squads, just like the killers he unleashed in 20 years as mayor of Davao City.
And so with the criminals, I said, if you destroy my city, I will kill you. And I told the drug industry people.
On Monday night, he spent 2 hours reminiscing at a business forum dinner. In Davao, his nom de guerre, the Punisher.
I will kill you.
He said he'd brought his skill set to his new job.
And you guys are lawyers. There's nothing wrong in saying that if you destroy my country, I'll kill you.
Vintage Duterte Harry.
I will kill you.
His audience giggled nervously. Then came the confession.
But in Davao, I used to do it personally, just to show to the guys that if I can do it, why can't you? And I go around Davao with a motorcycle, with a big bike, and I would just patrol the streets and looking for trouble also. Tagla naghanap ako ng inkwento para makapatay.
Duterte Harry still loves gunning up his Harley and patrolling. In his 7 terms as mayor here, 1,500 people were murdered by the DDS, the Davao Death Squads, allegedly sanctioned by Davao City Hall. In the past, he's admitted personal involvement, then denied it. In August in Davao, Clarita Alia told me 4 of her sons were among the victims. She blamed Duterte. She said, I saw this coming. President Duterte, as mayor and president, liked to pose with guns. A year ago, he claimed he'd killed 1,700 people. The next day, he said that he'd been joking. His drugs war is no joke, though. Manila's sprawling slums are being cleansed. Duterte, a former lawyer, has now said human rights advocates and drugs dealers' lawyers are legitimate targets too.
President Duterte, when he was mayor, has actually opened a Pandora's box in Davao. And all of this is going to be uncontrollable.
Most Filipinos, though, still love the president who has normalized killing. As president, he's immune from prosecution, but the International Criminal Court is already watching closely. Duterte Harry might yet end up shooting himself in the foot.
Asia correspondent Jonathan Miller on the president of the Philippines.
After the break, 7 years of bullying online and off was just too much. Now the mother of a teenage boy who took his own life has urged parents, teachers and other children, don't let this happen to someone you love. The mother of a teenager who took his own life because of online bullying has urged others not to ignore the issue. 17-year-old Felix Alexander died in April this year after enduring 7 years of abuse. Felix Alexander was just 10 years old when the bullying began in the playground, teased for not playing the video game Call of Duty. From there it spiraled, and as a teenager he became the victim of online bullying. People he had never even met began abusing him via social media. Despite changing schools after years of torment, he took his own life in April this year. Felix's mother, Lucy, has written an open letter to children, parents and teachers, urging everyone to take collective responsibility to prevent other young lives being lost. She appeals to children, be kind always. Earlier I spoke to Lucy Alexander. I began by asking her what sort of messages her son received.
Everything from that he was ugly, he was various abusive words they would use. Some, had a racial slant to them, racist slants to them. Some were just, it became who he was. And you didn't even have to say much. It was just, what do you want to know him for? He would be invited, or he would actually ask to come to a party. He was very rarely invited to a party. And then before long, he'd get a message from somebody who he didn't even know saying, you can't come to that party, we don't want you there.
In the weeks and days before he died, did he have any kind of access to psychiatric help or anything like that?
When he was, it was 2014, I think, he was seeing a psychotherapist. And when he moved schools, we actually thought he'd got to a better place. But in the weeks before he took his life, he was moody for about 2 weeks beforehand, but other than that, there was no sign. 2 years ago, I would have understood. I would have seen that it had its potential to happen, but this time I had no idea. No idea. Until that morning, and then I knew that morning. Once the school phoned me to say he wasn't there, I knew. But there wasn't anything, there was no one thing that tipped him over the edge, as far as I know.
Do you think, then, that what we're really talking about is somebody who was quite vulnerable for all sorts of different reasons, usual adolescent stuff, but whose vulnerability was desperately exploited by bullies who used the intimacy of the internet to reach his innermost being?
Yeah, he was... His only weakness, I suppose, was that he was quite sensitive. He wasn't, ridiculously sensitive. He was damaged by other people's behaviour to him.
Those other people you mentioned.
Yeah.
What do you say to them now?
My thoughts around them are very complicated because I truly believe there is no such thing as bad children. There is bad behaviour. And people do things for reasons of their own. I mean, a lot of the people who I think were particularly cruel to Felix have issues of their own. I don't think the people who are truly culpable actually understand that they are. One of one person said to me, how could I judge a relationship based on social media when everyone says what they don't mean on social media? And I think this person truly believes that actually it was, you know, all banter, and don't realise the impact of... Because I feel is so important is kids need to understand that actions have consequences. You can't just say something, switch off your computer and it goes away, because somebody received that and you have no idea what's going on in their heart and in their head and what will happen to them as a result of it.
What is interesting is that since you began to talk about this, you have learned that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of young people who are in this situation.
Yeah.
What's to do?
The important thing is catching children early, catching them before behaviours become an issue. It's an ongoing conversation. You don't have the anti-bullying lecture and then stop.
And what about parents? What do you
Parents
say to them?
have to know. Parents-
How do they have to know?
They have to know what their children are doing. One of the things that come up from this, I've had parents messaging me saying, I looked at my son's phone and I was stunned by what he was writing. They had no ideas that their son, their daughter, was being cruel. And, you know, they're nice kids, but they were saying things, didn't mean to be nasty a lot of the time, but hadn't thought the process through. So I want parents to be having conversations with their children regularly, daily. I wish I had talked more. I felt incredibly isolated as a parent. I felt that I was made to feel that there was something lacking in my child and my parenting that was a problem. So you keep quiet. And I wish I hadn't. I wish I'd shouted loud.
Lucy Alexander, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
Lucy Alexander speaking to me earlier, and if you or anyone you know is affected by bullying, then you can contact the organisation she works with. It's called Place to Be, and you can also find support on our website, channel4.com/support.
Thank you very much for watching. That's all we have time for.
That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.